Today we're going to keep on with the politics of the passion. You know, it's been a couple weeks since we got together. Do you remember what we talked about the last time we got together? Do you remember where we ended it? So he was arrested, and then he was brought before the council, and he went before the retired chief priest first. Remember, Annas went before him because his son-in-law is the high priest Caiaphas. And so what was the reason he went before Annas? Do you remember? It was the nighttime. They were back at the governor's mansion, kind of like the high priest's house. They were very wealthy. They lived in a very wealthy part of the city, highest points. And they went to their house, and they kind of did a little trial, pseudo-trial, we'll say, with them. And they went and sent him to Annas first to see if he would say something where they could get him. That was the goal. And then when he didn't, he gets slapped in the face by the guard. And then Caiaphas, he goes to Caiaphas. Caiaphas and him have this exchange. And that's where ultimately he says, the next time you see me, I'm going to be coming on the clouds. And that's what kind of sealed the deal. And it was because, who did they equate that with? Where does that come from? From Daniel. And there's the cloud rider in Daniel that comes to the Ancient of Days. And then what does the Ancient of Days give the one like the Son of Man who comes on the clouds? What does he give him? The kingdom, all authority, all power. And Jesus says, next time you see me, that's going to be me. And they're like, we got it. That's blasphemy. You just made yourself, God. And so, no, that's not going to work. And so they said, we don't need to hear anything else. We don't need any more witnesses. We got you. And so now it's a matter of carrying out what they originally planned, which was, what did they originally plan to do? They said it in the beginning, that they was never interested in whether or not he was a legitimate Messiah, Savior, if he was really from God. They were only interested in killing him. So let's do a quick little recap of where we were. So Judas obviously betrayed Jesus. He's now arrested. He was interrogated by Annas and Caiaphas. He equated himself with God. We talked about that. And so Jewish law says blasphemy. And so now they're going, okay, we have got charges, we believe, and so we want to execute him. Okay? Look at this in Leviticus 24. This is where they're kind of hanging on to some degree. And you shall speak to the Israelites, saying, any man, when he curses his God, shall bear his sin, and he who blasphemes Yahweh's name certainly shall be put to death. The whole community certainly shall stone him. So this is your blasphemy laws in Leviticus. This is probably the big one. And the question is, what do you mean by blasphemes, right? In this one, you can even say, well, this sounds like a man who curses his God. In fact, the story is a guy who gets into a fight. That's the example in Leviticus. These two guys get into this fight, and the one guy actually curses God. He blasphemes God's name. And they're like, can't do it. And they take him out, and they stone him to death. Now, did Jesus do that? He didn't blaspheme God's name. I mean, he is God's name. But they held he blasphemed because he equated himself with God. And so to some degree, you can see where they kind of finagled the law a little bit to say, blasphemy. How can we put Jesus into this category? Remember, you have the person you want to convict. Now you got to find the crime. That doesn't happen anymore, does it? You find the person, and then you go and chase the crime. Yeah. And so what they do, I mean, there's an argument that's made in legal circles that says you could indict a ham sandwich. You ever heard that before? And it's because literally, if you want to mix the law enough, you can get anybody can probably be convicted at some point for something, if you want to get them. And these guys are they're probably not the first ones to do it, but you can see them trying to do that. We have the guy, we already read the verse a few weeks ago. They set in their minds and hearts to kill Jesus. He had to be eliminated. Notice it didn't say they were set on trying to find charges to see if he was legitimate or not. No, he's got to go, and we got to find a crime to pin on him to eliminate him. So they take it, and you find these little ways to manipulate it, and they got authority and power, and what do? He's a blasphemer. And so that's where we're going to get him, is blasphemy. And so that's the law. You're supposed to take him out and stone him to death. So the Sanhedrin charged Jesus with blasphemy because he equated himself to God, not because he cursed God. There's no evidence that he cursed God. They didn't even have anything. But this was enough for them to say, it's under the blasphemy, lines here in the text, so we're gonna go with that. We're going to go with that. Now, there's debate on whether they used the law appropriately for this charge, right? Because it doesn't totally fit exactly Leviticus. Jesus was not stoned to death as the law of Moses required, was he? Even if they said blasphemy, they changed the punishment for a purpose. And we're going to look at that in just a second. But if they really cared about the law, they would have said, we got to take him out, we got to stone him to death. They didn't do that. They didn't do that. So why didn't they? Because they're people, and they think they have control over the law instead of the law dictating to them what they should do. Now, why else would they want to change the mode of execution from stoning to being crucified? Here's the big thing, is that not only do you have to kill him, but who does he have behind him? Think about this, is it's one thing to turn somebody into a martyr, but if you want to really shut them down, you have to eliminate their following, don't you? You have to disenfranchise their following. And that's what these guys wanted to do. It wasn't just enough to execute him, because his followers and many people that knew him may say he's a martyr. They turn him into a saint. They turn him into someone greater than he even was before. But if you can separate him from his followers so they think he's cursed by God, isn't that just what we were talking about? What does Judaism believe about him today? They kind of somewhat accomplished it because they hung him on a tree. And that's one of the big arguments Judaism uses to say he's not the Messiah, because anyone hung on a tree is cursed by God. That's what they knew, that's what they propagated, and that's what still stands.
So it's manipulation.
Yeah. And so they changed the law on blasphemy, carried it out differently, and we'll see how they argued that in a second. But it was for the purpose of trying to convince the public that saw him hanging, yep, that was a bad decision. I should not have put my trust and hope in that guy, because he's hung on a tree, he's cursed by God. You don't do that if you're... See? And that's what the goal was. Separate him, not only get rid of him, but separate him from his followers. Try to separate him from his followers. Now, in the time of Jesus, capital punishment crimes were outside the jurisdiction of the Jewish High Council. The Sanhedrin had no authority to say, we're going to kill people. Now, under the law, they could say it was a capital punishment crime, and you need to be executed, but they couldn't do it themselves.
No.
Why not? Because the Romans are in charge. And when you're under Roman law, you have to give the authority to Rome to decide who lives and who dies. They can't just have every other group they control deciding, well, you know, we don't like this guy, we're going to go ahead and execute him. They said, we will have control over that. It will be ours to decide. And so if you want that, you have to come to us. That's what Rome was doing. So they knew they had to do that. Rome had jurisdiction over Judea. This is Pilate's area. We're going to talk about him in a second. And so in order to execute Jesus, they would need the Romans to sign off on the decision. We want him gone. You guys need to be okay with it. You need to sign off on it. Now, the Romans allowed the Jewish leadership to punish people for various crimes, but they couldn't. It wasn't capital punishment. If it was somebody that was being a rebel rouser and causing trouble and they wanted to give them lashes or a whipping or something like that, they could do that. That was in their jurisdiction. You just couldn't kill anybody. You couldn't execute anybody. They didn't want to have to deal with all that stuff. Think about it. They're the Romans. They just want to deal with the big stuff. You know, just tell me if we have to make a decision here, but you guys basically rule yourself. And they did this in about every area they took over. They came in, they found leaders of that particular religious group or whatever, and they made a deal with them. They said, we'll give you the power over your people if you'll answer to us. That's what the Sanhedrin did. That's what the Jewish High Council did. You work with us, you keep control of your people because you're part of them, you're natural born here, and we'll make sure things work. You'll get rich, we'll have peace, everything goes well. And so that's what the High Council's role was. It wasn't just they didn't like Rome. They probably would like to have not been under Rome, but the people more so didn't want to be under Rome. The High Council's getting rich. These people are wealthy. If they stay in power and the Romans know they're doing a good job, they keep power. So there was kind of a good old boys at the top club between the Romans and the Jews. They could do lashings, so the Romans counted on the Jewish leadership to keep the people under control. That's really what it came down to. They gave them limited authority to do it. Now, here's in John 18, they brought Jesus from Caiaphas to the governor's residence. Now it was early, and they did not enter into the governor's residence so that they would not be defiled, but could eat the Passover. There's kind of some funny things in this verse. Now, first of all, it's early in the morning. Remember, Jesus was arrested all night. They interrogated him. And then first thing in the morning, the Romans would actually start about 7, 8 early in the morning, and they were done with their workday by noon. And it was because it was getting hot. And they would basically like, nope, we'll get everything done between morning until noon. And so if you wanted to come in and have something with the Romans to do, you had to be there early. And the other idea was, we're going to take them early because everybody else is still sleeping. People are still, there's Passover's going on. You got tons of people. They've probably been up, all these activities. We're going to get this done before people start coming out and getting going, so we don't have a problem on our hands. And so they can't go in there, though, because ironically, even though they're manipulating the law, they're trying to kill a guy. What is their argument for not going? Well, we couldn't possibly defile ourselves. See how backwards their minds are?
They already did.
They did defile themselves. I mean, they've defiled themselves long before they entered. And why can't they go into the Roman fortress? It's Gentiles. We can't risk defilement. You see how their mind works? The law says this, do that. We can go kill a guy, alter the law, and do what we want to get rid of our political enemies. But as long as I follow the law, what a mess. Here's the ESV version of that same verse. They led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. This one, it actually says to the governor's residence. Sounds like it's Pilate's house. It's not his house. Okay, this is not Pilate's house that they're going to. This is King James. They led Jesus from Caiaphas into the hall of judgment. Well, this is actually what it looks like if you look at it in Greek. And you can see here the word is praetorium. It's not a residence. It's not really, they all kind of are trying to get that praetorium, but it's a meeting place where they would come before a Roman leader and he would answer questions or give judgments or do things. It's kind of like a big meeting place. It wasn't where Pilate lived. It wasn't his house. Like, it wasn't like where he slept. I know in some places they'll make it sound like, well, Jesus was brought to Pilate's house and he came out on the front step and had to answer. No, that's not what's going on here. Okay. In fact, I'm going to show you a picture of it. Remember when we looked several weeks ago at this is on the top edge of the temple grounds. You can see the temple kind of in the background there. But this is the Anatolia fortress. So this is where the Roman guard stayed, and it was elevated up above, and it would look down on the big court of the temple so that they had control over it. If there was a little bit of a disturbance, they could down in there and they're ready to go. But this is the Roman station at the Temple Mount so they could keep control over the people at the temple. This is where that is. It's inside here. Okay, so they're back at the Temple Mount, essentially, and they're at a specific hall or room inside this fortress. And Pilate would come from where he did live here at times to do these things for different events. And that's where they knew he was in town. Now's our chance. See how this was all coordinated. They knew exactly what they were doing. So it was inside the fortress. It was the garrison for the Roman troops to watch over the temple grounds. And this is where Pilate resided when he was in town. So it was just like his hotel, okay, when he's around. But he actually lived in this place, Caesarea Maritima. It's further away, and obviously he couldn't just drive back and forth. So when he came to town to do things during specific events, he had to have a place to stay. Well, he didn't stay with the Jewish people. Where did he stay? With the Romans, in their fortress at the top of the Temple Mount. That's where he was at. He actually lived in this city, and it was the port city. It was the capital of the province. So he was not a residence. He did not have a residence in Jerusalem. He just came. Think of the Old West. Remember, they used to have the marshal would come to town every so often, and they'd have the criminals there until the court martial came, and then they would give their. It was kind of like that. Kind of like that. So why now? Why was Pilate in Jerusalem at this time? Well, God obviously had a plan, but there's things he did in order to get Pilate here at this time. So Pilate was responsible for making sure things didn't get out of control. What's going on? What's going on in Judea right now in Jerusalem? Passover. You have about 4 times the normal people. Maybe 50,000 has jumped to 200,000. And he's got to be there to make sure things don't get out of control, because his head's on the chopping block if it does, because he's the Roman guy in charge of this area. So he makes the trip in so he can say, we got a huge influx of Jews coming in here. I need to be there and have eyes on so I can make sure things don't get out of control, because I'm the one in charge. And so he ends up going there. Plus, if he stayed there, he might be in danger. He actually needed extra security. Think about this for a second. What are they celebrating at Passover? God's deliverance through Moses and coming out of there and having the Egyptians defeated. And so there was all this sentiment in the hearts of the people as they're celebrating Passover. And the Romans knew what Passover was about. And so they had a little bit of a worry to say, we need to beef up security, because if we don't, and they get some wild hair to say, we're going to get rid of Rome, who's going to get it? Probably Pilate. And so he's got to come to a place where there's more security. And so it's kind of a twofold reason that he's in town, for the security and just to have control over the growing crowds and the situation that's happening there. So what's his job? Well, he's basically the overseer of the province. The Caesar sends him there. And his job, literally, is to take care of the judgment. So he's just punishments, big ones that needed to be elevated. That's my job. My job is to deal with those things. And he could just declare what it was, and it was like Caesar was talking. That's the kind of authority they were given. They had a very specific, Latin term that meant by the sword, or the carries the sword. So he was kind of viewed as the one who had the authority to decide whether you lived or you died. That's really what Pilate's job was. He was the end all before you went to Caesar. And he carried all the authority of Caesar. He could execute anyone that was non-Roman who lived in the province simply because he said, we're doing it. Why non-Romans instead of Romans?
Romans had special protection.
Roman citizens had special rights. They had trial rights. So you had to be given an opportunity to have a trial. Very similar to how we do stuff. Now, we do it for everybody. But they had it where if you were a Roman citizen, you had special rights. Remember what Paul says? I appealed to Caesar. And at one point, King Agrippa says, I would have let him go if he wouldn't have appealed to Caesar. But he sent him to Rome because he used his Roman right as a citizen to say, I want to appeal to Caesar. And that means, it's a legal term to say, I get a trial, I get to stand before Caesar and make my case. Agrippa would have let him go. Festus would have said, you can go. You don't have to. But he appealed to Caesar. So during Passover, there was this increased risk of uprising. We talked about what that represents. Obviously, salvation and freedom from oppression in Egypt. Well, here they are under Rome. You think somebody gets... I got an idea, guys. Let's storm the residence of whatever, and they could do it. So they had to beef up security. Now look at this in Acts. This sounds kind of strange, but I want you to look at this verse. Now when they heard these things, they were infuriated. This is when Stephen... Remember what Stephen says? He says he sees Jesus stand there. Look what it says. But he, being full of the Holy Spirit, looked intently into heaven. He saw the glory of God and Jesus standing at the right hand of God. And he said, behold, I see the heavens opened and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God. But crying out with a loud voice, they stopped their ears and rushed him with one purpose. Remember, he gave them like a history lesson. It's like several pages. And then basically accused him of missing the whole point with Jesus. And they go, how dare you repeat what he said when he was, isn't what Jesus said? Next time you see me coming, I'm going to be at the right hand. I'm coming on the clouds. Blasphemy. Now, what's interesting, and the reason I show this to you is look what it says. And after they had driven him out of the city, they began to stone him. And the witnesses laid aside their cloaks at the feet of a young man named Saul. That's interesting. He comes back a little later. And they kept on stoning Stephen, and he was calling out and saying, Lord Jesus, receive my spirit. And falling to his knees, he cried out with a loud voice, Lord, do not hold this sin against them. And after he said this, he fell asleep. You guys have heard the story probably. Here's the question. Why didn't they do the same thing with Jesus? Who's in charge during the time of Stephen's life? The Romans. How is Stephen executed by the Jews under the Levitical law outside of approval from the Romans, but Jesus is not? And so one of the questions that's to be asked is, think about it. Jesus is in their custody. He's been there all night. They could have just killed him in private behind closed doors, couldn't they? We know that God had a plan in this. But they didn't for a reason. With Stephen, they had no problem. Just take him out and stone him to death. Blasphemy, boom, he's gone. They didn't get Roman approval. They just rushed him and out they went. And it was because when they wanted to do those things, sometimes they would violate the law and explain it later. Jesus, you think, would have been their number one time to do that. This is our big problem. Let's do this. But they didn't. And they didn't because it was more important to try and get him separated from the following and from the Jewish people than it was necessarily executing him immediately. They wanted to, but it was more important that we get rid of his followers first. They have to turn away from him. So we've got to do it differently. So they kept him.
Didn't do that with Stephen then.
No. He just upset them because he called them out, and they just said, you're a blasphemer. And then they followed the Levitical law. Take him out and stone him to death in their minds. And they didn't ask the Romans to approve it at all.
Okay.
Boom, done. But with Jesus, they wanted it to be done so it looked up and up, official, everything's good. He's been tried by us. The Romans even signed off on it. You know, he's publicly disgraced, hanging on a cross. And so as people will say, they followed all the rules. They did everything by the book. I guess he's just another one of these guys. And some of them still believe that. Now look at this in Galatians. Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us, because it is written, cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree. There it is. And who's the authority on this? The same guy who basically right here was saying, I'm okay if you kill Stephen. But what happened to him? He had a total transformation, didn't he? Because Saul turned into Paul, and then Paul is the one who writes this, who studied under one of the top officials in the Jewish council, Gamaliel. He was his mentor. And he's the guy who had any common sense up the ladder. That was his mentor. And this guy is coming out saying, no, you guys are missing it. He became a curse for us. He wasn't cursed of God. He was, but in our place, so that he could be elevated above every name. They didn't get that. They still don't get that. So what's the motive? Well, the Jewish leaders had to determine that he was going to die. He had to be eliminated, but they didn't want him viewed as a martyr. We've got to separate his people from him first. We have to get them focused back on us, not on him. So we're going to have a public display showing that not only did man reject him, but God rejects him. And anybody that follows him should be ashamed and turn back. That's the idea. That's the plan. People would hopefully abandon their loyalty to him. The Jewish leaders, let's see, we went through that. John 18, here it is again. Now it was early and they didn't want to enter the governor's residence, so they would not be defiled but could eat the Passover. So Pilate came outside to them and said, what accusation do you bring against this man? Now think about his statement. There's a lot of people that wonder, did Pilate know who Jesus was? And the vast majority will say he had no idea who he was. He didn't. This is his first interaction with Jesus. And I'll show you a couple reasons why that's probably the case. So, number one, let's talk about Pilate. He was just one level below what they would have held a Roman senator. He held the authority of Caesar in his area, his province. But from a Roman hierarchy, he was just right almost at the Senate level. And senators were really important. I mean, they got to make a lot of decisions. He ruled in Judea for 10 years. Very unusual, because you had a 2-year term. So he did 5 2-year terms in the same place. Very unusual. They would swap them out a lot of time. But most of the Romans that went to Judea knew it was nowhere anybody wanted to go, so they knew what they could do is they would go there and no one cared, and they would make deals, and they knew they could become extremely wealthy by basically ruling and lording over the people there because no one cared. The Romans didn't really care. These were areas no one wanted to go. So there was a lot of bribery, a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff that went on with Pilate, and he knew he could get away with it because of where he was stationed. So you can just probably guess he just became more and more wealthy. Why leave? Why leave? So he stayed there for 5 terms. Lots of taxes, different things. So based on Pilate's response, it appears this is the first time when he came out and he says, what accusation do you bring against this man? That's his response. Now you have to remember there were other revolutions attempted against the Romans. They were always squashed by the Romans. But did Jesus have any indication of this? Did he match any of the characteristics of previous revolutionaries? No. I mean, think about Jesus coming along. He has these 12 guys. He's not going out recruiting soldiers. Guys, get your weapons. We're going to meet, there's no indication he's doing that, which he wasn't. He was teaching people about loving your neighbors and teaching very good principles. He didn't care. Rome actually didn't care about Jewish theology, so they didn't care what he was teaching. They just wanted to make sure you weren't raising an army and it potentially coming after them, right? That was it. They didn't care. They had a million rabbis. So he wasn't on their radar. He didn't do anything that would have garnered any attention because he wasn't building an army. He wasn't preaching, let's overthrow Rome. He was just out there as, like, in their mind, a philosopher. That's what they thought. Other revolutionaries were killed, and all their followers were arrested and killed. You know what happened with Jesus? He was arrested by the Sanhedrin, and yeah, the Romans killed him, but they didn't arrest all of his followers right away. That's something they did with the other revolutionaries, but those guys were intent on taking Rome, kicking him out. Jesus never said that. He didn't do anything like that. Jesus' disciples were not arrested. So to Rome, Jesus was a non-threat, nobody philosopher. They probably didn't pay any attention to him. He was just there. So Pilate obviously comes out, makes this, he says, "What accusation do you have?" And it says, "They answered and said to him, 'If this man were not doing evil, we would not have handed him over to you.' So Pilate said to them, 'Well, take him and judge him according to your law.'" So Pilate's going, I could care less. This is not a Roman issue. This is a Jewish theology issue. And I don't care anything about that. In fact, notice what they say. They didn't say he's a blasphemer. What did they call him? Just an evildoer. He just does evil. And you can bet Pilate's sitting there going, oh my goodness, why are you wasting my time? That's exactly what he's thinking. And so the Jews then say, it's not permitted for us to kill anyone. We don't have the legal authority to do that because of Rome, and so we need you to sign off on it. And he doesn't want to because he thinks it's a waste of time. Now, if you had a problem in the Roman culture, if you were a Roman person or anybody under their law, here's what your job was. If you had a problem, you had to go gather the evidence. You had to make the accusation. You had to bring the crime to the court. You became the prosecutor in your own wrong. Someone did something to you, you go make the accusation, you go find the witnesses, you make your case just like a lawyer would do, and you have to present your evidence to the authorities yourself. You couldn't just go hire an attorney to do it for you in these days. This is what the Jews did with Jesus. Okay? Kind of. And it's because they really don't have a good crime, do they? That would warrant Roman execution. They just say, the guy's an evildoer. They didn't even say he's a blasphemer because the Romans would have been like, we don't care. Blasphemer? We don't care about that. They say, he does evil. He does what's wrong. They don't even have a good crime. So they just tell him he's doing evil. And so if he wasn't, we wouldn't have brought him to you. Kind of a way of trying to get Rome to sign off on a generally accepted principle of evil versus blasphemy where they would have cared less. So they have to manipulate their language again to try to get the Romans to sign off on it. Is an evildoer enough under Roman law? No, it's not. The Roman law does not say, oh, a person's an evildoer, you get to call them an evildoer and execute them. You would have to have legal reasons under Roman law to do that, and evidence that they broke some type of law that warranted in that. So Pilate entered into the governor's residence and summoned Jesus and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" That's kind of a weird question considering what they just accused him of. Now there's debate on maybe there was some conversation that went on. Well, what do you mean by evildoer? What do you think, what's he doing? And they're like, well, this guy is a traitor against Rome. Maybe they're having some conversation out on the porch. Jesus is being held. And he's going, well, that would be the only thing that would potentially spark a Roman interest, would be, are you claiming to have authority over these people like a leader or the revolutionary? And so what does he ask him? Are you the king of the Jews? Are you their leader? So what was the crime the Jewish leadership told Pilate? Probably he's a traitor against Rome. He's saying he's a king. And so they're manipulating the language again to try to get Rome to do it. Notice blasphemy was not what they told the Romans because they didn't care. They wouldn't have cared about that. But they got to get rid of him. So we have to change it a little bit to make it more of a Roman thing. Well, he's treasonous against Rome. Now there's this thing they would do in Rome called cognito. We've probably heard incognito before. But cognito is actually a form of justice the Romans administered in provinces, and it literally was the prefect, or Pilate in this case. He could actually bring someone in and he could ask questions without a formal trial going on. They had a specific word for it called cognito. And his role was, if I find fault or I find innocence, I can just make the call. We don't have to deal with the trial. And that's what he's doing with Jesus when he calls him and he starts asking him questions. It's a Roman process for the prefect to say, let's see if I can just get to the bottom of this and we're not going to do anything else. They didn't have to do it with non-Romans, but sometimes they would. They would do that. And so that's what he does. Jesus obviously wasn't a Roman citizen. From Pilate's perspective, because he didn't even have a house, he didn't have property, he was a poor guy, he was on the same level as the slaves. So when he brings him in, it's like talking to a slave in his mind. A nobody. Jesus replied, do you say this for yourself, or have others said this to you about me? Pilate replied, I'm not a Jew, am I? Your people and the chief priests handed you over to me. What have you done? So there's kind of this back and forth. Are you saying I'm the king, or did they tell that to you? Well, I'm not the one who brought you in. There's a reason, and you can see their discussion going on. And Jesus replied, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would be fighting so that I would not be handed over to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here. Then Pilate said to him, so then you are a king. And Jesus replied, you say that I am a king. For this reason I was born, and for this reason I came into the world, in order that I can testify to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. And Pilate said to him, what is truth? Now, it's an important question, but I want you to think of Pilate's perspective. He's a Roman. He could care less about Jewish theology. He's part of that wisdom class. There's so many places across the Roman Empire where people would just get together in universities, and they would just discuss things, philosophy. And guess what he sees Jesus going? These guys accused you of being a traitor. You have some weird philosophical, theological thing. This guy is not a threat to Rome. He's just another one of these Jewish philosophers. And so he throws out the question, you think you're right, everybody does, so do all the other philosophers. What is the truth, really? Is he really interested in the truth? No. He's just thinking about, this guy matches not a traitor, treasonous to Rome, but just another one of these traveling Jewish theology buffs who wants to get into debates over spiritual versus literal. Because that's kind of how Jesus responds to him. My kingdom's not of this world. Okay, I see where you're coming from. You can see where Pilate's at. Just another one of these Jewish theology things. Jesus has never spoken out against Rome nor committed any type of treasonous behavior. Otherwise, it would have been on Pilate's radar. And you have to remember, he refused to be the king. The Jews tried to make him the king at one point, and what did he do? Nope, and he's out of there. So there's one where he's not trying to take over authority. He actually told the people to pay your taxes, give to Caesar what's due to Caesar. So this is like your perfect rabbi if you're a Roman. He doesn't let them be king. He tells them to pay their taxes. They had no issues with him. He was not on the radar. He was just another one of these rabbi, philosopher, religious guys that the Romans could care less about. As long as they're not causing problems and raising up armies, we don't have an issue. So Pilate has probably never seen Jesus before this point. He was not on the radar. Just not there. Matthew 27. And when he was being accused by the chief priests and elders, he answered nothing. Remember? So after this exchange, they're standing out there and they're still throwing stuff at him, accusing him of stuff. And Pilate looks over to Jesus and says, do you not hear how many things they're testifying against you? And he did not reply to him, not even with reference to one statement. So the governor was very astonished. See, as a Roman citizen, if you got accused, you had a right under Roman law to speak to your accuser. Sounds kind of like our court system a little bit. And you could defend yourself. And here, Pilate's understanding this law, and he looks at Jesus, who's being accused of all this stuff, and he's going, why aren't you responding? Why aren't you defending yourself? And he doesn't understand why he's not trying to make a defense if he didn't do anything wrong. He's just standing there quiet. And he can't wrap his head around that because he's a Roman legal mind. This isn't what you do. Now, they did have sometimes in Rome, they called them orators. They're basically lawyers. If you could afford one, you could get somebody that would come in and stand up and speak for you. If you weren't a very good talker, you could hire a guy in Rome, and they would come and they would give your defense for you. Sounds like an attorney, right? That's what they had. But you had to be able to pay for one. Otherwise, you had to do it yourself. So Jesus didn't confront his accusers as Roman law typically saw, and that obviously made Pilate go, what? Like, this is odd, extremely odd. For he knew that they had handed him over because of envy. What does Pilate know right away? You have no legal basis to bring him to me. I know you guys are just mad at him. After I've heard this stuff, you're just mad because he's got a following. So what does he say? While he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent a message to him saying, have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I have suffered much as a result of a dream today because of him. That's weird. They were a little bit, they were still religious. They believed in the gods and so on in Rome. Pilate's wife, this is her name, Procula Claudia, okay? And she actually is a saint in the Greek Orthodox Church. And why? Because they believe that she became a Christian after this event. In fact, Origen, who was a scholar in Egypt, Origen of Alexandria actually wrote that she became a Christian. Now, this was hundreds of years, a couple hundred years later when we have that. But so they've actually turned her into a saint in the Greek Orthodox Church because they think that she became a Christian. Isn't that interesting? Now, what happened to Pilate? There's lots of debate and traditions and beliefs on what happened to him. Some think he actually became a Christian after this horrible ordeal. No evidence of it, but there's a question. Some believe he committed suicide, that he actually did get himself into some legal trouble. About 10 years, obviously after being in Judea, he ends up being recalled to Rome because of some abuse of Samaritans and killing of Samaritans and what they said was not lawful. And so they brought him in and they were going to put him on trial. And some think that it was kind of like they're going to kill him anyway, and so he may have committed suicide. But interestingly enough, Tiberius Caesar died, who was the emperor at the time. He died, and they dropped the case against Pilate. So when the Caesar changed, this thing about Pilate abusing the Samaritans just disappeared, and then we don't ever see anything about Pilate in history ever again. So the debate is, what happened to him? We don't know. We have no idea. I think the suicide one, there was some other things politically he got into, and some of his other captains kind of got executed, and so some think he was next. Either it was going to be behind the scenes or public, and they were going to get rid of him, so he just killed himself. But we don't know for sure. We don't have a 100% guarantee on that.
Did he and his wife stay married?
We don't know. No evidence. We have nothing about Pilate beyond that. We just only have that thing in church tradition back to Origen that talks about what he thinks happened to his wife. But it's a tradition. So next week, Pilate goes to Herod. Pilate sends Jesus to Herod. And we're going to look at that, and that'll probably be our last week on this. We're going to see it reach that point, and then it'll be the execution. And that's kind of where we were getting to, is to look at all the events and all of the things that happened to get to that point.